All right, so let's get started here. My name is Chris Jatek. I'm the chair of SHiNA, the Southwest Hills Neighborhood Association. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate the interest in this topic. This is the first of our initial community conversations. It's sort of a new concept for us, so we are learning. So any feedback you have, we would really appreciate it. We'll be doing more of this topic if we see that there's enough interest to expand on it, because there are so many different ways we can go with this, and other topics of current interest, of which there are, of course, many. First, I'd like to introduce the other board members who helped put this all together. We have Ralph McDonald, Fred Mallory, behind him, Rita Fiedler, Clay O'Neill, and Ben McDonald. Small group with a lot of energy, and we're, of course, always looking for more help. We always have to get that out. So the logistics of this meeting tonight is towards a conversation. So we're going to start off with some Q&A. I'll get to the panelists we have here of local experts in the field, and you can direct questions to them, and then enhance conversation amongst all of us. So I'm going to get back to, you've already found all the refreshments, and I will encourage you to, even after we're done, to stick around and talk among yourself if you want. The purpose of this is to enhance community conversation between neighbors. How many people know that they're within the boundaries of the SHiNA Neighborhood Association? We did, okay, we have about half of the group. The rest of you, thank you for coming. We did advertise this a lot more widely than we normally do for our meetings, but we felt that this is a very important meeting and a good way of learning about what homelessness is about. So, understanding homelessness. We see it every day. We see it everywhere, Eugene, the Valley, the coast, throughout the state and beyond. We turn our heads so we don't have to engage. We avoid certain areas, certain streets. We see the tents, the push carts, all the belongings, what is kept, what is left behind as they move about. We see people, individuals, couples, children, young and old. We get angry, and we should be angry. But to whom? To them, to local government, state government, federal government, the economic system, our education system, healthcare. It's a broad range of impacts. As we start the new year, both local and state government leaders want to address the homeless issue, making it a priority. What does that mean? How are they proposing to have the discussions so there is full understanding of what has created the situation? Are they dealing with symptoms, or are they going to get down and dirty and look at dealing with the origins of the crisis? And the future numbers are only growing. There are many questions. Many of us think we have solutions, and we all, of course, have our biases. But in order to understand the discussions that will be taking place, we have to understand the issue. Who are the homeless? How does someone become homeless? Why are some people in a chronic long-term situation while others make a transition to a better life? What is in those carts? What role do drugs play? What role does mental health play a day in their life? A little bit about my background is I've been here for 2.5 years, and in getting to know people, talking to people, invariably it's, how do you like it here? Invariably, the biggest transition issue for me has been witnessing the homeless. I came from central Wisconsin. We didn't have the issue like we see here. There were definitely people who were unhoused, but there were services taken care of. We didn't see the tents. So for me, it's been pretty shocking, and I have questions. That's why we put this together, because if I had questions, a lot of new people, obviously from the group here, haven't have questions as well. So that's what we're hoping to get some answers to your questions tonight. So that's what we're looking for. So to provide an understanding, we've put this community conversation together. We have 3 panelists. We'll introduce them, and pretty much we want to start off with some questions, and we'll just between the 3 of them, figure out how to answer that question and keep it going. I'm sure one will lead to another. So we have Tracy Jocelyn, who is the co-manager of the Nightingale-hosted shelters down the street, basically. History of being homeless, so she can give personal attention and answers to that. Kelly McIver is the communications manager for the unhoused response for the city of Eugene. He's been around for many years.
Been around the broader community since 1974, so I grew up here in Eugene, and so I've seen it, change over the years. But I've only been with the city now for a couple of years. So.
But you've been active in the community.
I've been active in the community. I've been
from your bio, yeah.
University and 4J and on the property here in Eugene and.
So you may have seen him in other instances, but he's got a wealth of information on this city's response. And then Heather Selecki has been around for a long time as well. Community advocate, and has been working with the unhoused homelessness for many, many years. So between the 3 of them, I think we have some experts to be able to answer some of your queries.
Chris, could I just ask the speakers to use the microphones for our recording system?
Yep. Okay. Well, I've tried many times trying to make microphones work with me, and it just doesn't go well. This is not my favorite thing to do. But my part's over. I can sit back and answer or get questions. Why are you guys here? Who wants to start? What are you looking for coming out of this meeting? I'm hoping people. You come out here with a better understanding of who are the homeless, the hows, the whys, the whos of homeless. I mean, you hear a lot about, well, we got to build more housing, build more shelters, and that's part of it, but it's a little more complicated than that. I see some heads nodding, so there's some agreement with that. So, Jim, you have start us off.
I wonder one of you could address what has happened in Oregon State about housing mentally ill people.
Are you catching that, or should we ask
the microphone?
Ask the microphone. Can everyone hear?
No.
So you missed. I have to repeat everything I said.
Yes.
Sorry, I should have asked that.
My question has to do with housing for homeless people. It's my understanding that since about 1980, there's been a big reduction in mental health facilities in Oregon State. Can you say something about that?
Sure. You want to take that, or you want that?
I could just start to say that we just don't have enough. Certainly a lot has closed, and we don't have the sufficient amount for how many people need it right now.
Places have been closed?
Yeah, so the state mental hospital used to be a major facility to accommodate mental health needs, and that facility completely changed its scope. It's been massively reduced since the time, like you're talking about, back into the 70s and the early 80s. And then at the same time, the numbers of people experiencing mental health issues have gone up dramatically, and the need and sort of the impact on our communities has become more severe. So that is definitely one of the areas that we're most challenged in, is people who don't have the individual capacity and fitness to be able to necessarily care for themselves well, or kind of respond to the changes in things that are occurring, and we don't have resources to be able to adequately care for them. It's a very high standard for anyone with the government to basically take somebody into care, against their will. And if people have capacity issues, they may not be able to recognize a need that they may have, and they're not going to necessarily be a willing partner in kind of seeking care. And yet it's a very high standard to take somebody and to get them put into a hospital system where they would receive care. They have to be posing a danger to themselves or others, and that's a very high bar. Our police on the streets are asked to intervene in those cases all the time, and they know what their role is, and they know that even though this is a very concerning case, it's not something typically that rises to that level. So it's something that our municipal court and our community court program that looks for creative ways to try to get help for people who may not reach that bar of being able to go right into what's left of the state mental hospital system, that they can get care locally or get care within the state system, but we've all recognized that it's just not adequate to meet the needs that are out there.
I have a question statistically. I'm sure that you probably have the 2022 stats that could speak to the enormity of it and how many you are currently serving as to what the totality of the need, both in terms of numbers of folks that could use help in that regard, and also the dollars. What portion of those come from state funds and federal, and what you're currently dealing with in funding, and what you hope to anticipate in getting the necessary funding. Could you give us the differences in those numbers? Thank you.
This one live too?
Yeah.
Why don't we use this? We'll use this one for the table, and then if you all want to shuttle that around.
Test it.
All right, we're good? Good. Good question. More information than I have here. I can give you a few of the numbers. So we have in Lane County a system. It's actually very good. In most communities around the state, they participate in, we do here too, what's called the point-in-time count. So it is a 1 day per year where folks go out and basically count the number of unhoused individuals out on the streets. We just had the count for 2023 here a week or two ago, and it's okay. I mean, it produces numbers, but it's not terribly accurate because it just relies on what people find at that time. In Lane County, we have what's called the Homeless by Name list, which actually counts the individuals by name who are seeking services throughout the county for any kind of homeless services. And then it's kind of broken down by the different things that they're seeking. So we just, for 2022, we had more than 10,000 people who were seeking and having some sort of a touch point with services, for Lane County only. And our average throughout the year for just Eugene, just our portion, rose throughout the course of the year to up to, I think, 3,600 on an average nightly basis. So it increased from January, the monthly averages increased January through December, reaching up to 3,600 people. We have about 1,000 shelter beds that are available locally in total, all the different programs, both the ones that are supported by government and also not, like the Eugene Mission, which are not government supported. About 1,000 beds or so. So you can see that nightly we're dealing with maybe 2,600 unsheltered people in Eugene alone. So obviously a huge issue. I can't speak to the funding for all the different areas because there is money that comes from all the different sources, federal, state, local. Here in Eugene, we have folks are paying into a a community safety tax that goes to support some of these things. Most of the programs that the city has started and developed over the last couple of years, the Safe Sleep Site program that we've gotten going, and some of the other things related to that, that's all been done basically with the one-time federal money that's been passed through to the state and to the county that the city has then utilized for that. Unfortunately, that's going to run out in the end of the 24 fiscal year. So it's about, we need about $7.5 million per year to keep those programs going. And as great as they've been, we added basically more than 250 new spaces, starting at a time when the COVID restrictions had really limited the amount of shelter bed capacity locally. But you can tell that that's still a drop in the bucket. I mean, it's a great thing for the people who are in there. They're being well utilized. People are being able to get connections to services and achieve stability and have an opportunity to move on. But we don't have enough housing on the other end to move the people through that system that we'd like. And then, of course, there's still just the issue of there being literally thousands more people who are unsheltered. So we're constantly seeking that. Right now, the legislature is in session. We are actively lobbying with our local delegation to try to get more funding from the state. Governor Kotek, of course, has proposed, about $130 million in a budget-cutting cycle for the state. Where that money is actually going to come from, how much will actually be made available, and how it'll get distributed to communities is still up in the air. So we're actively working on all of that. We know that we'd like more federal funding and assistance too, and other ways that there can those things can get moved forward, like more housing through things like low-income housing tax credits and housing vouchers. So there's things that the federal government can do that can help. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a look of it. So I'm sorry, did you have a question or anything that yeah.
We could speak much more tersely and make our points. There's three things that are very obvious to everyone. We've had many conversations right here in this room, and obviously we need tens of millions of dollars for programs from the state, which we cannot pay for in Eugene, for addiction services like recovery programs and for mental illness. And we're waiting for legislature, as you pointed out. And secondly, we need more well-run Conestoga camps, rest stops. They don't have to be Conestogas, they can be sheds and stuff. But we need about maybe 1,000 of these places for people to be able to get out of their desperation of literally living in tents and cars and get on their feet again, of which the 34th and Hilliard camp has graduated. More than 300 people have gone through there and have gone out mostly into housing, and they got back on their feet. This is a system that works. And thirdly, of course, so we don't have to be assaulted by the law and order people, it's actually true, we need to have police for the people who are misbehaving. Thank you.
Thank you, that was great.
Let's see, sir, I saw you.
First, I'm sorry. You spoke very, very well, I thought. But I'm not sure what your role is in the community. Officially, what is your role?
So I work with the folks with the City of Eugene who do the programs that we have in the city that attempt to address homelessness. It's just one of the many pieces of the puzzle here locally. So I work in communications. I work with kind of getting information to the community and from the community back to our teams. And also with other providers and kind of helping get the word out and share things with the community.
So you're a contracted consultant?
No, I'm a city employee.
Oh, well, you didn't say that. So you said you...
I said I was with the City of Eugene, so that, in our parlance, that typically means that we're employed by the city.
Okay, thank you. In this survey that you do annually, is there an attempt to try to find out if there's a root cause originally? I mean, everyone has the same reasons for being on the street pretty much after 5 or 10 or 15 years. But the very first time they were homeless, What was that? I mean, were these veterans still, and if so, how many? Are these people with mental illness, and if so, what percent? Are these people who who are just unable to come up with the money to get a house because the housing stocks are so low? Just get a sense of what is the problem and what are the components.
And my answer would be yes. They're all of those people and ones you didn't name. Currently, about a third of the people who are experiencing homelessness in Eugene have one or more disabling conditions. So that's medical debt and health is a pretty large concern. And then there's also addiction, which many consider a health issue. We had money coming in for COVID, like Kelly was saying. We didn't have enough providers to be able to spend the money that was available. Largely, we've been using volunteer labor through the church system for sheltering people during inclement weather for almost 15 years, a solution that was supposed to last just one season. So it's not just money, right? It's also having the staff and the facilities and the organizations and the training and all of those things, and then having a functioning, coordinated public safety system. And these are all things that we can't just address somebody's losing their job and going on the street. It's all of the different systems that are failing people and creating records amounts of homelessness at a time when we also see earthquakes and wildfires and other things that are actually making more people lose their housing than ever before.
I think it would be, Tracy, would you be willing to speak to some of the folks that you see and, in Nightingale and what some of the root causes have been?
I'm Tracy. I'm a co-manager of Nightingale Hosted Shelters at 34th and Hilliard, across from Dairy Mart. We've been in operation 5 years and helped 245 people into more stable housing. Thank you. And one thing I wanted to add was, in addition to all those funding sources, is we have a board of directors who fundraises to run our rest stop, so that's a pretty substantial amount of funding as well. And root causes, my brain's just spinning around because I started working with homeless people at the dining room, so root causes are poverty from childhood, which I really noticed working there. Root causes are people getting kicked to the curb one too many times. Me personally, I have a safety net and I'm not going to lose it because a person needs medical, person needs to eat. So keeping a job, we're an at-will state. So you can have a job and be all set up and they can say, kick rocks, which is very unsettling when your whole life depends on keeping that job. So many people have given up. I will never say anything disparaging about people who live unsheltered, unhoused. So that was what I thought about a lot today, because everybody is somebody's mother, son, daughter. Root causes, did I mention poverty? Root causes too much rent. Like, I remember being in a march once and a veteran who I'd seen around town said, I was told if you work hard every single day of your life, then you're going to be okay. Well, that's what's gone away. I can testify myself, my work ethic is not the problem. And I quit paying rent at $650 because I couldn't work that hard. So I've always had a vehicle to seek refuge in. So there's people with cars, people without cars. People on the streets have to stick together to survive, so there's a culture there. One of our rest house functions since we started was to keep people out of having to live on the streets. Maybe they need to go back to where they grew up and get family support. Many people fall through the cracks, even in the military. People just get kicked to the curb, like a veteran who has an alcohol problem, the Army or whatever, the military, doesn't really take the time to deal with that person. They dishonorably discharge them. So there's a law that's passed a couple years ago, even if you're dishonorably discharged, you can access benefits. So that was huge. Losing a child, losing your family. A man who used to hang out right South Eugene by Elan Brothers when it was still there, Walt, he passed away. His wife and kids got brutally killed when they got hit by a car. A drunk driver. Many, many people out here have family who's been hit by drunk drivers, like trauma, that's the word we use. Trauma, and they just live. And they're really good people. But what are they going to do? Go buy their house and keep their house up when everything they had was lost? What if you have a child pass away? What if your parents were meth addicts and you got addicted at a young age? So I'll stop, but compassion is really the first place to start. When you get out of prison, you have a felony on your record. There's people that hire felons, but you can't get Section 8. You can't get subsidized housing. When you don't pay your child support, you lose your license. So when you lose your license, how are you supposed to get work? Like, we need to build people up. And you all know that.
Oh, thank you, Tracy, for your experiences and sharing them with us. It's clearly a big, wide problem. It cuts up and down through all of our society and sideways. And I would like to focus a little more on preventing it to begin with, early on, upstream, any way you want to put it. But clearly, homelessness is the last stop for many unfortunate cumulative circumstances. And it seems that the prescribed fix-it is to treat it after it's happened. Homelessness is preventable. And it has been prevented in this country under lots of social stresses in our history. The Great Depression comes to mind right away. It was prevented from recurring over and over since then because people they were educated for independent self-sufficiency to be resilient. But that education ended in the 70s and 80s. So now we're seeing it come around again a couple generations later and doing the same thing. So I would like to know if Eugene, is there anybody talking about prevention and specifically education? So
from at least the city perspective and the county perspective, I I would say no, but not because it's not important, and that's the purview of our schools, and I'm sure that there's a lot that they, are constantly striving to do around, keeping that system going and improving it as much as they can. The way that I kind of think about how we approach homelessness and in treating it, it's sort of like the hospital ER. You can't not treat it. You can't say, well, gosh, this would have been much better if we would have made a bunch of changes back there. So we have to do what is doing that treatment of the symptoms. But yes, absolutely, I think that and that's part of that national conversation, is looking at, all right, where does this start? What can we do about education and the economic system that would allow people to, as Tracy indicated, I mean, we see it all the time with the costs of housing outpacing people's ability to pay for it with what they make. And so that's part of what we're working on and trying to, again, address with more affordable housing, subsidies, things to try and keep people from being evicted if possible. It's all very complicated, but it's an attempt, but absolutely, and that's where I think this is, one of those things for people in the society to be pushing for those greater conversations on education and having a system that doesn't allow people to get kicked to the curb like that.
I learned about stigma, and so I'm wondering what, and this relates to her question about the prevention. I know that places like HIV Alliance and just recently, I guess, mental health, I know Laurel Hill Center, they've started doing some harm reduction. And that's just been as of recent, but one of the main huge root causes is stigma. And this dates back to, everybody, all these programs going through the church system, which, those are dated back to centuries old, rules of, where they're not updated. And a lot of that stigma comes from those church days where people don't really go to church anymore. I mean, they don't have the time for it, for one. And a lot of people just don't like church because a lot of judgment comes from church. And so, I think that when I was staying at community-supported shelters, I felt like I was being punished, going through that program, for being homeless. And I mean, this is the first time that I had been homeless. I'm not homeless anymore. I just got into housing a couple of months ago, but I don't know how that's going because they have mental health people in shared housing with, just like they're not doing compatibility matches like they do for the students. And then another thing that I hear is peer support specialists coming in and basically telling their clients that they're job security instead of, actually them doing their job and stuff. And so it makes those people not even want to show up to their appointments. And, I would rather actually go live in my car at this point.
How did you want to address that? I turned that off, by the way.
One thing that your comments made me think of is in most of our systems, we have an ombudsman that people can go to talk about a standard of care. We don't have that at all. It's actually even legal and lawful in Eugene to say, I see you've been homeless, I don't rent to homeless people. Because there's no law against it. So you're right, the stigma against having been homeless, the stigma against having had mental illness, addiction is a huge reason why we haven't been able to establish the number of facilities that are needed, fund the programs that are needed, and retain the staffing.
it's all interconnected.
Hi. Thank you for your work at Nightingale. You mentioned that there have been 245 people that you've moved from Nightingale to homes. So I'm kind of like a nuts and bolts kind of person. So, I mean, I think that there must be like many, many baby steps to get from being unhoused to being in a home. So can you tell me about or tell us about the steps that it would take to get somebody, I mean, even to get from an unhoused person to get into Nightingale, that's a huge leap. So what would be the steps along the way? And then how can agencies help? How can the money that will be coming down the pipeline from the governor, how can that help? I mean, what do you see that needs to be done, step by step by step?
Well, I heard you about living in community supported shelters because a first step is to get in, and if you're actively using like meth or heroin, it's kind of, I'm missing the word, a blocker. A deal breaker, a wall. So I'd say detox comes first for a lot of people, and then you can come to Nightingale after you've detoxed. But we need much more places for people to go get support when they're detoxing. And kind of got to be pretty messed up to get into detox. So that's just a 3 to 5 day program. So that's where I think we need the most work. But really, since the beginning, we've provided that when people come into Nightingale, they can experience community. And then community reminds them of that they're, this doesn't sound right, but valuable people, because I'm not saying they didn't realize they're valuable people, but when you're in a community and you have a stove to go cook on and you go make breakfast, it's like keep normalizing things, and you have a place to keep your things safe, which to me is the hugest thing. There's a man outside, and if I didn't have a car or a hut, then I would probably look like him, like 2 shopping carts worth, at least, right? You need stuff to survive. We're Americans. Homelessness is sustainable. Okay, I won't bring that up, but I do think that when I live in my hut, you know, I'm being pretty good to the earth. And so the steps is just like realizing you're safe. And then about 1/3 of our residents have caseworkers, which is just huge because a rest stop provides a place for caseworkers to find people. So when we started, that was our real niche too, because now more people have phones, but how are you going to charge a phone anyway? So then we say, what do you want to do for work? We're working on our job development part of residents because we made it through COVID. That was just weird. So now we can just get back to focusing on what people need instead of how can we all survive. And we got 0 cases of COVID at Nightingale hosted shelters, so thank you. We have the cleanest outhouses in town. Cleaning the outhouse. We have a gate duty, so our contract states that there has to be a person in charge at the rest stop all the time. So gate duty, you're in charge of the rest stop. So people see that they're valuable again. We get donations. Every neighborhood needs a rest stop. Every rest stop needs a neighborhood. Just on Valentine's Day, we got chocolates, and we got hand warmers, and we got some muffins made. And anyway, you get like, there's a man who hangs out at Dairy Mart a housed man who reads the paper and smokes cigarettes, and he said, what rest stops did for our neighborhood is take away the fear, because we're just people. A lot of youth, you just remember that you have a purpose in life, even if it's cheering up that person next door to you in a hut. Now, finding work and finding housing is what we need to work on also, because you could say go find housing, but it's kind of not accessible. I ran into a friend and he's like, Tracy, why are you living there? He didn't know I was co-manager, but I'm co-manager so I can live there. And he's like, there's a place for $970, a studio with bright windows and light, and it sounded really nice, all utilities paid. And then after I got over the shock of him running into an old friend and having him say that, like, why do you live there? It's like, well, you should come see it, it's really nice. I'm like, 970, okay. I haven't done the work on paper because that is pretty affordable with all the utilities included. So I really think being a part of a community, but being able to be yourself is the hugest thing. And then our board is so amazing. They're all professionals, retired, and they would gladly mentor all of it, right down to getting a job, but it takes getting people to get there. Maybe some dental work and some counseling, and we have passes to the YMCA, so we're baby stepping it to being fully functional. We can even hot tub and work out, you know, after we go to work for the day. So a lot of job training needs to happen. People get out of the habit of, it's a morale thing, you know, like it's kind of two worlds, the working world and the survival world. So mentoring will be huge in the future as we keep going with this. I always thought rest house would be much more activist oriented, but people really just need to focus on themselves. So.
Thank you, Tracy. I was going to ask the panelists in regard to detox. Some cities, notably Salt Lake City and perhaps Boston, have low barrier shelters. Are you aware if those are open to detoxing and to all really low barrier as far as you can come as you are?
Yeah, we have a lot of low barrier shelters. It's not as low barrier in some cases as we would like, because we would love to have shelters where we could fully accommodate pets and partners and have ample storage for possessions. Unfortunately, that structurally, becomes challenging. So some of our organizations can't accommodate pets for liability reasons and other just functional things of how people and other animals get along with each other. But in terms of the, allowing people to be processing what they need to in terms of their personal health, including their issues with addiction, we've got a lot of good shelters around here that, there's no requirement for that. We understand that people are, we'll try to help them find assistance with their addiction, but we understand that there's people who are using, that there's not people who are ready for that yet, and we would rather have them in the stability of a shelter than out on the street experiencing that, where they can get that contact with medical care when they need it and also when they're ready for it.
Is that like dusk to dawn and dawn to dawn?
Yeah, dawn to the St. Vinny's shelters. So, there will be things that, some of the organizations, essentially they're, it'll say, hey, we don't have drugs here. Well, they need to say that, but they're also not, they're recognizing who their occupants are, and they're not going and they're not doing aggressive searches. They're not kicking people out because, they know they're using. It's really a careful line that they have to walk around that, but everybody that I've met in the system tries very hard to meet people where they are, because they really understand that there's more benefit to them to be in the shelter and in the system and have that access, to the case management that's so huge. So they know it's better for them.
As far as just, a lot of times when we think of low barrier, we think of like walk-in. There's very limited walk-in shelter. Even like dusk to dawn, I think you have to be there at 4:30 and then your place closes. So there are very few places. The Mission, there's a lot of criteria that you have to place. And there's not like a central dashboard that anyone could look and say, are there any open beds tonight? It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's true that the Mission rescue beds, it's not the same kind of demands as their long-term program. So that's one of the drop-in options, and then dawn to dawn.
And Egan is low barrier. Or no barrier.
I was serving in the last 2 months. I've had it pretty easy. I got federal housing, you know,
Nice.
and it can be crazy too, but it's definitely nice, and so I shouldn't complain. But what I noticed just the last 2 months in Eugene, you know, OB Enterprises, Ryan OB, whatnot, they expanded their buildings, you know, and a lot of people, including myself, didn't do any research on it, like what are the specifics of what they're doing. So it seems like they're going to have some workforce housing, or maybe mixed housing or whatnot. I don't know, still don't know the specifics. You know, I went down to city council and I just questioned the whole thing of the average rent being about $1,000. And, you know, there were only 8 people there, and then I didn't bother checking their website, but I checked their website just recently on January 23rd because they talked about, they had a special meeting, you know, so they had a special meeting, and it's about the possible exchange of 4 acres by Hudson Stadium for a new sports facility, and then the university gives them 8 acres by the railroad tracks, North Campus, I believe. So that instantly perked my ears up. And I observed the meeting, you know, what they were talking about. It ran for about an hour. And so I went down there, and I was just on Tuesday night. And I'll try to be real brief. I may have gotten sidetracked, you know, because I almost wanted to know about the specifics of OB thing, which is done. It's going to happen. There's going to be new jobs, whatever, new housing, maybe luxury housing. I don't know. But I said, what about these 8 acres? And then I found out in just watching the web pages, the University of Oregon, wherever it is across Austin Stadium, they've got property to build a new sports facility, whether it's going to be there, whether it's going to be in Glenwood. And so it's very complex. They have all these other little plots, and that the university or Nike wants those another 4 acres, so they can make a magnificent structure. Best in the country, probably. But I said to them, I want 8 acres of housing. They need 8 acres of housing on that river, and I know that is very complex. And I really hope that they do something like that, because I guess my last sentence is, that's a lot of money. $189 billion is Nike's net worth. University of Oregon, I don't have the exact figures, but hey, I said to them, don't deal with the University of Oregon, deal with Nike, and make sure you get some money out of this thing. Try for $1 billion. So, thank you.
There's a question.
You talk about all kinds of services that people have access to, and I'm wondering from a technology standpoint, does a person who's struggling with homelessness, do they all have phones? Are they able to access services with phones? Is there some sort of common base that they can all access all of this from, or not? I mean, how do they interact with your services or not?
Sure, I'll give a quick answer and then let the other folks share. So We have free Wi-Fi at all of our Safe Sleep sites. We have charging stations available for people. In my experience, most people have phones these days, so I mean that is a way that people stay connected. The human contact of having service providers actually come out to the facilities, schedule meetings with people is critical. So while there are certain things you can do online, there's no replacement for people from HIV Alliance, from Whitebird, from Laurel Hill, from any of the service providers locally, case management from Lane County coming out and working directly with people to go over their options with them, to go through questionnaires, find out the kind of services that they qualify for, and then making sure that they are on the lists and things, and then touching back base with them so that when they have an opportunity to get an appointment, whether it's for medical care, mental health care, addiction treatment, potentially for housing, that they're getting the follow-up with that and getting the support to be able to get to those things when they need to, so it's not just left up to a person in technology.
One of the challenges to getting technology going is just trying to get the system coordinated, because it's really not. So there's not like one technical platform that people can go to, and instead it's more like when you go to your doctor, you still have to go to all these specialists, and so it's not intuitive, and it's not something that you can fix with technology.
And even with support, there's no low-income housing to access. So we're kind of spinning our wheels. Caseworkers, I'm sorry. There's just so much in my brain. Like, what are we supposed to do when caseworkers, detox, da-da-da-da-da, we need affordable housing, subsidized housing. And it's probably going to happen because a lot of people need shelter. And then even when you get in an apartment, low-income housing needs support. So many people just need support to succeed in life. Elders need support. So in the housed community, you have hopefully neighbors and friends that will help you, but really everybody needs support and low-income housing. No answers.
Hi, thank you all for coming tonight. My name's Clay. I'm an architect, and I work at the university in architecture, focused on affordable housing. And so I have a question for you, because as we're designing projects around the city trying to provide more housing, rising construction costs make that more and more unaffordable to actually do. And an architect recently asked me to bring something back to the university, which is how can we kind of blow up the system and think about creating housing faster and less and more affordably for more people. And to me, that means housing at a lot of different scales. I recently visited the newest Safe Sleep site, and we have a studio that's looking at how we can design those to be more permanent installations. Like, you've created a community where you live. Can we support that as designers in the design community? So I guess my question for all three of you is, what are the scales of housing that you think are needed so that people can move from one stage to the next as they exit a system of homelessness and recurring homelessness?
That's a great question, Clay, and my answer is all of them. So we've seen, one of the things that we're blessed with in Eugene is we have a lot of variety. We have a lot of different kinds of shelter. We have a lot of different kinds of housing. As Tracy's noted, we need more of all of it. We need more shelter. We especially need more affordable and supportive housing. But we have all these different kinds of things that people have been trying, from the really, really tiny small shelters to tiny houses to the Conestoga huts. And all the ideas, I think, are welcome, because we want to look at how can we do this, how can we make it work for our climate, how can we make it as affordable as possible and as flexible as possible, and then certainly looking at ways to be able to erect proper housing structures and do that as safely but also as inexpensively as possible, because the cost and the timeline for doing these projects, it's staggering. And we had one affordable housing project fall through in the last couple of months just because of the economic changes globally that we had nothing to do with locally. So, it went from something that penciled out for the developers and everybody involved and having the right tax credits in place to not being a viable project that'll have to sit on ice until the economy improves. And that's the kind of razor's edge that we're on with these things. So, design that comes up with things that can make all of that more affordable, that would be huge.
One of the things I'd like to see is more common buildings and then smaller buildings. So more village-style communities, more single-room occupancy, but updated for now. Especially we have an aging population. We need more senior-friendly and multi-generational housing, more community land trusts, all of those things. We need to be able to provide some incentives for people who have more house than they need to divide that, to go with a duplex and triplex when possible.
Multi-unit dwellings, like so that's the future build up, not out. I'd like to point out that a lot of people come to the rest stops or get shelter that do have work, and then they save money there and just go into affordable housing, and they're fine. We have somebody give him 3 months, he said to me today, 3 months, and he'll have enough money to move out and have a little extra. So it's not all uncatchable or undoable. So we're talking about people that need extra support. And I think rest stops, like they're good, we're called temporary shelter. Is that right, Heather?
I think so.
Yeah.
Transitional.
Transitional shelters. I knew it didn't sound right, but they really are temporary. For the amount of money that we spend to run it, it's probably lower, but it is still substantial. And I can see apartments, old apartments, being purchased and trailer parks. And then, I'm an idealist. Have the people who are living there fix it up, and that just takes another kind of support. But that's kind of what you got code and everything, so that's not as easy, but it always takes building up community so people can contribute so that they have a will to live and a good life, because everybody needs to contribute to feel wanted and loved. So we need to put that in the mix too, like Habitat for Humanity, the people help build their own home, like that kind of model. Value and worth.
Well, Square One Villages is a new thing, and I think it's actually one of the tiny homes for low income that is supposed to be where they put sweat equity into the community as a community.
Yeah.
And then they have their own dwelling that they rent it out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So.
And people volunteered to build those.
Right.
Which was awesome.
The Square One Villages is a community land trust. The land trust is owned by a board and operated by a board in perpetuity. And this, in fact, I'm planning to donate my land to a community land trust when I die, because what do I care after I die, right? But I can take my house out of capitalism forever. And in fact, Square One Villages accepts donations of homes, and it will be used in perpetuity for the purposes designated by the donors. But I was just going to mention that as far as having cheaper housing is so easy. I mean, come on. You have a 14 by 28 foot shed out there at the Nightingale on 34th and Hilliard that costs $9,000. This is 14 by 28, let's see now, that's like 400 something square feet. And there are people who are living in kind of stogas would kill for this. And there's land, the city of Eugene has bought 500 acres of land out there on the other side of over Hilliard out there in the Great Lands, and it costs $200 for every 1,000 square feet. That's 25 by 40, well big enough for any of these small sheds. And that's enough for like 25,000 people to have a piece of land for $200 each. That's a lot of land. This is how cheap land really is. And this is really a matter of government policy. Government policy is saying that land shall be expensive and the code shall be difficult. And I bought a house over here. It was a tear-down house for $125,000 right over here on 29th and Alder. And I'm rocking it over there. I got 2 houses, and I'm housing one unhoused person who was living in her truck for 20 years, and she's living there. And there's land there for 2 more places now that we're allowed to build fourplexes now. Did you know you can build a fourplex? Any of you homeowners, you can build 4 units. They don't have to be attached. You can plunk down 4 of these 14 by 28 sheds and right across your land, and you can subdivide it and sell them to those people for like $20,000 each. In fact, if you subscribe to the city's planning commission, they distribute a newsletter. In fact, just in the last month, a property was permitted out on next to the Vistara and Dharmalaya properties on Horn Lane, out on Off River Road, and that is an acre of land that somebody bought for $180,000. An acre for $180,000. And so they're going to subdivide this and make this into cheap housing. Cheap housing is absolutely possible. Don't accept anything less than the real thing.
Yep, comment?
Hi, yeah. I'm Fred Mallory, retired from EWEB in the energy management program. Still working energy management with electric vehicles, but we have been talking some at SHiNA about the MUD, multi-unit developments, and to the city of Eugene. Could you give us a little report on how that's developing?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, all that effort, though, to say that, whoops, that's out of my area of expertise. But I would be happy to have one of my colleagues in that field do a follow-up with SHiNA and provide you some information for a newsletter or something like that and give you a full update.
Any formal or informal estimates on different aspects, different costs, just like the housing piece alone, or the mental health piece alone, or the employment piece alone? Are there different estimates on what it would take to actually house 4,000 unsheltered people every day? Or are those numbers not available?
So that second thing you said, not available, but the Chamber of Commerce is embarking on an economic study around this very topic. It's been done in some other communities, and it's something that we're excited about the possibilities, because it's always useful to be able to show what the true cost is, and obviously it differs because everyone is different, but in the aggregate, what those costs are, and especially comparing that to the cost of not doing anything, the cost that people incur to the community and the systems in the community when there's a constant need for kind of, urgent help. And those things typically, when I've seen them, there's been studies that have been done in other communities, and the cost of, just sort of allowing people to hit rock bottom and then to constantly need emergency services and those kinds of things, it's astronomically higher than the cost to house people. So we're hoping to get some of those figures locally sometime here in the next 12 months or so.
We meaning the city?
All of us. So the city, the county, it's I think my understanding is the Chamber of Commerce is kind of the driver on pursuing the study, contracting with an agency that would do that survey work. but that we'd all benefit from it, because they're very interested in having kind of a community-focused solution around this.
I could just speak to think of it like a hotel. It's going to cost a whole lot more than a hotel, though, because you have different types of staff. When I helped to set up a safe sleep site, we were looking at about $30 per person per night, just to run, kind of substandard shack housing. And during the pandemic, when in 2020, when it first hit, that was a big push because the federal government was allowing funding hotel rooms for people, but we couldn't find a hotel room that would allow us to do it. So there was no government compelling them to accept people into their rooms. But at the very minimum, it's roughly the cost of a hotel room per night per person.
Yeah, I applaud all the work that's been done. I grew up here. My family's been here since 1852. So, I've watched a lot of changes, and I've left and I've come back. And I've watched the compassion for people in need, and I see that here. What my real concern is now, I'm going to step back to a view of the community, and I think we're all distressed to see people in the streets, whether they're in a tent or they're on the sidewalk or they're in a trailer, and now we're seeing people shooting up on the streets, and and the city's getting scary. I mean, we're having more violence in our town. So I see two things. It's like, okay, we've got 2,500 about per night, right, on the streets. Somehow we got to get them off the streets, or in a place where they're more easily found and accessed. Is there an inventory of state, city, and county property that's vacant that we can access? I mean, I think we need, Ellen Zelenka, I think at the last city council meeting or recently, said this is unsustainable for the government to, provide the housing. And I heard Dan Bryant say, when I pushed on what is affordable housing, it's government subsidized housing at which people can pay on average $300 to $350 a night, as an individual to pay. Or a month, right, excuse me. Yeah, pardon me, thank you. Yeah, per month. So, I'm thinking somehow we've got to get the architects and the business community to come into this, but it starts with, do we have land? Is there an inventory of land where we can put a brain trust together to work on this?
So the gentleman with good lived experience in the back may have a different thought on this. But when you're talking about, the government taking a place and having a bunch of people move there, it's just not as simple as, all right, you got a plot of land, let people go put tents there. And what we found is that, all this process where, the city council's goal in developing the Safe Sleep Site program was more aspirational than what we were able to come up with, because it was so challenging to find not just land, but appropriate land that would be appropriate for people who were in that situation, to be able to use public transportation, to have proximity to grocery stores, to the services that they would need. It's not just as simple as like, oh, there's a thing out in the desert or something like that. And so it is more complicated than that, and more expensive to do the right thing, which is to provide the support, provide the staffing and the services. And this is where it takes the will of, the entire country, because this is, honestly, it's not a moneymaker. This is never going to put, money in somebody's pocket to help people that have, that have fallen through our system. And it costs a lot. It costs a lot to build stuff. It costs a lot to staff it. Honestly, we should be paying the people who do outreach and who do staffing and service much, much more. We need many more people who are skilled and have the strength and will to do that work. And that's going to cost even more. So sorry to be such a rainbow of happy news on that, but it's not just the land piece. It's all the other things that go into it as well.
So is there an inventory though of property available
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we went through that process, looking for anything that, what the county had available, what the state had available, what was, basically what was something that wasn't going to, cause dire environmental impacts, but then meet the other standards and things. So again, there's not a lot that's viable for that. And then when you look at, we basically maxed out the funding that we had available with the 5 approved sites that we developed. If we're able to somehow get more to keep, that successful program model going and add more, then that's great. But, right now the tap has kind of run out.
There is a regional land inventory database, which your neighborhood association has access to. And you could work with them to get a list of all the vacant properties. When the city did the search, they just focused on city land. But actually, there's a lot of vacant land that are owned by other entities, including the county and ODOT. So if you were looking, there is land to find.
We looked at the state.
Oh, yeah. There's not a lot of land where people are willing to let people live.
That's it. Please speak to Chase Commons. The people around Chase Commons have resisted having the rest out there for a long time.
Chase Commons, kind of low-income housing.
Well, that's the Commons at MLK. So that's a permanent supportive housing complex. So Chase Commons, that actually opens as a safe sleep site in the next 3 weeks or so.
Oh, the Commons at MLK, yeah.
Yeah, that's the building.
That's not open yet?
That's been open for a while.
Okay.
But Chase Commons, the safe sleep site on the park.
Yeah, it's a medical respite site now, but it takes a long time. Look at Nightingale. It's been cited for how long, and do you have electricity yet?
We're waiting for the water to come through. And we're on that piece of land because Heather was on the neighborhood committee.
And how many years have you been waiting for electricity and water hookup?
I'm not real high.
Hey, I think our friends at eWeb are going to help on this. I hear good things. So.
Okay, I'd like to kind of expound on what you folks have all been talking about. You're talking about land that's not developed, it sounds like. What about existing buildings that folks could renovate and obviously a no longer utilized shopping area or something like that is not appropriate initially for housing, but then we have clays come in and do their magic, and of course you probably need different zoning to allow for adequate sewage systems and such like that, but actually convert it into what you were talking about like maybe an apartment complex with a common area, a support system, etc. I don't know, but it looks like, as a novice, there's a lot of property that isn't being touched. It's probably complex. I'm just curious.
I could just say it is complex, and it really helps to have neighbors who live near somewhere and see that there's an open building, advocate for that. In fact, the girls' home across from the post office is there because the SHiNA neighbors advocated to get that put there. So you have a lot of power as a community member if you look for the property and then go and ask for it. Now, there hasn't been enough money coming in to secure a lot of property like we did with the girls' youth home, but the more people who are looking for it, the better chances we'll have.
Hi. Yeah. 30 years working at Whitebird, the homeless program. 5 years in Portland, the Indian Council, working on Burnside in the 70s. I don't like to lose. And I was working in an occupation that we never won. We would get people lined up and there was no housing. And we got paid and they were on the street. That was the reality. And but I know a couple of things. People have gotten wealthy out of the homeless situation. They are the people that do financial investments. They are the banks and the savings and loans. I can look at the property taxes on our house and realize that in the past 30 years, we're a lot richer than we were when we started. So, in the 80s, when I started here, in 81, 82, working on poverty and low-income issues, I got to go to a meeting where there actually was a map of property, and it was empty, and where was it, who was going to be there. The biggest ones were the rail lines between Eugene and Corvallis, because they're the most accessible, and there's nothing being developed along there. At the time, mills were closing down. The land is still there. On the freeway, at the clover lease, you'll see some motor homes. There's some trader courts being built. They're filled up. They're $500-600 a month. I don't see the reason why we can't do that. I applaud Terry McDonald for trying to develop some of these trader house cities. I think it's the fastest way to get people into some places of their own where they can invest. But no, there's a map. But I guarantee you that 4 or 5 different people, that's their job to watch those maps, are not going to let you look at it. That's my understanding. I said, what about going on down here at EWEB with the bridge? And what are we going to do there where the little all-night cafe was and the corn people? What's that going to happen? Oh, no, don't worry about that. We're not going to do anything there. Well, 20 years later, you can see what's going on. It's pretty clear. So I'm a skeptic, but I certainly do love these 2 people up in Canada. Those 2 women are amazing people.
Thanks, Norman.
Chris, can we do a time check? And then do you have a wrap-up time or anything like that?
I think we were shooting for around 8 o'clock.
Okay.
We can stay behind and do individuals if we want, but let's shoot for around 8 o'clock, so another 10 minutes or something like that.
So is there, I know in California they were doing some, I actually think they did it in Portland too, where they renovated a hotel and then turned it in. I guess it was called Project Turnkey. And so, I mean, I don't know of any places around here that is big enough that isn't already being used. I think one of the ones on 6th, going down 6th Street, I think they turned that into for the fire victims. Right.
And there's some veteran specialized housing in one of those that's converted.
So I would like to ask Heather and Tracy for 1 or 2 things that you would like to see the city doing that you think the city could do and isn't.
One of the things that I think the city hasn't been doing is involving the planning department. They've just been focusing on crisis response, and what we have is a chronic issue here in Eugene. So, as I understand it, and Kelly can explain, I believe they've moved it under planning, and I'm hoping to see more long-range thinking. If we're going to be getting a lot of money from the state, from the declaration of emergency, I hope we can leverage that with opening up land use to make more housing possible. Because if we're going to build 36,000 houses a year, where are we going to put them? We need to start looking for where those places are now.
Yeah, and actually we do have, the City of Eugene has a housing implementation pipeline that doesn't just include homeless shelter. It's got the whole gamut through affordable housing. So we actually do have folks in our housing division of our planning department that are working very aggressively about trying to create more affordable housing, permanent supportive housing. They were instrumental in the opening of the NEL and some of the other programs around here. So we have folks that are deeply invested in that, and that's a big goal of our planning department. So they want to create, or enable the creation of more market rate housing as well, because more housing at every level means, more affordable housing too, but they have a huge push on trying to facilitate and incentivize the affordable stuff especially.
And two people sharing an apartment, even if they have a housing voucher, is really important to make that easier. And two things I would like the city to do is, this is a fantasy of mine. Oh, look, there's a camp over there. Let's get them a bathroom. Like, isn't that the basic level of respect? Charge a stipend of bucks, and above all, sanitation and the fence companies, because they definitely profit. So where's the kickback? Anyway, we're all adults here, and there's youth out there, so that's my new thing. And youth are very intelligent, for lack of better descriptions. They're very capable, and so we need a whole new model for youth. Like, they need to come up with their own system that they're going to live under and get out of thinking it's okay to live without your basic needs met, because we're failing big time there. So why can't the adult homeless help the youth, or why can't the adult homeless come to high schools? And back to what you addressed of prepping kids. I personally don't know how without scaring the heck out of them. But I'm sure you have ideas. Like, we can't be like, you gotta work or you're gonna be like that guy over there. Like, we need some new visions and education, you know. We need the unhoused people and people on Social Security to help. And they would if we set up a way for them to. I learned at the U of O, you take a map of the most toxic places and you take a map of the lowest income places, and there's the same map. So we ought to always keep aware of that when we're making our plans, and not just throw low income people to soak up the toxicity. Yeah, bathrooms and a legal place to exist. There's a nice biblical quote, but my friend used to say, even the squirrels get to live. People with dogs, you know, like, that's what I would like for the city to designate a place where you can have a campfire and there's bathrooms. Just take more of a leadership role in giving people places so that community members with extra can go support those people and remind them of each other's humanness.
Time for one more.
Thanks for the lead-in, Tracy. I would like to say that I put up a website that explains the prevention concept and the education concept. It's called humanecology.edu.com. And it takes it through the whole process. So if anybody's interested in working more on preventing upstream, then, you know, let me know. Thank you.